you have Rav and Shmuel, you have Abaye and Rava. There's certain rabbis that were colleagues that had, that disagreed with each other on many issues. And so here the Gemara pointed out that they're arguing also here in this situation. Well, what's the question? What's the issue? The issue was, as I just mentioned a moment ago, there's a halacha that when you put on the schach, the schach has to be made in a way that in a kosher fashion. But if the schach is placed in a way where it's not kosher, if the cover for the sukkah is placed in a way that it's not kosher, when you placed it, it wasn't made kosher. You have to make it kosher. Not that it is something, it has to be made in a kosher fashion. And therefore, not if it was made in an invalid fashion. So if you place the schach on a sukkah and it was attached to the ground, it was made not in a kosher fashion. And now the question is, if I cut the branches, now I cut it from where the vine was attached to where it was attached. Is that called, is that as if I made it now? Do we look at that action of cutting the vine? It's like an action of making, I made it. I now made this, I made it kosher. I made the schach in a kosher fashion. Or at the end of the day, I didn't make it in a kosher fashion. I just cut, when I made it was placing it on top of the sukkah, was making it. My making the schach, my making the schach was how did I make? First is make a sukkah. Which is the sukkah is the cover. When I made it, it was made not in a kosher fashion. So do we say that now that I went in and I cut it, is that cutting of the schach, cutting it now, is that considered, how do you look at cutting it? Do we look at cutting it as if it's an act of making it? Well, the cutting it is not an act of making it. I just cut it, but it's already been made. It's not an act of making it. You hear the question? How do we look at this cutting as if it's, if I cut it and I take the schach and I lift it up and put it back on, that's everyone, you will say that I made it now in a kosher fashion. Because I took detached schach, I cut it and I picked it up, and now I put it back down. I move it. That's called making it. There's no question. Everybody holds if I cut it now, after I placed it on top, and then I cut it, and now it's detached. If I pick it now, subsequently I pick it up and I move it, everybody holds that's called kosher. The question, the Gemara is, do I need to do that second step? Is it sufficient now just to cut the schach? But they hear the question? And the Gemara brought that Shmuel says that you have to go ahead and lift up each and every piece of the schach. It's not good enough just to cut the vine. Now it's detached, because at the end of the day, we look at the sukkah was made in an invalid fashion, because it was made while it was attached to the ground. So now that you happen to cut it now, it's no longer attached, but at the end of the day, it was made and it's still made and not in a kosher fashion. That is what the Gemara has stated. That's what Shmuel said. If you cut it before you put it on the vine, that's beautiful. Before you place it on top of, that's the kosher way to do it. You cut the vine, and then you put it on, then step two is you put the vine on top of the sukkah. That's the way you do it. But here the problem was you put it on the sukkah while it was still attached to the ground. And the Gemara brought a similar question regarding tzitzit. There's also a law regarding tzitzit that you have to make the tzitzit in a kosher fashion. The making of the tzitzit also has to be in a kosher fashion. It's not that, but if you made the tzitzit in a not kosher fashion, you tied the strings and you made it in a not kosher fashion, then and then somehow something happened that now technically you want to say, is it now kosher? But if it was made in a non kosher fashion, it also would be no good. What would be right? Let's say I'll give you might be a good example. If I went ahead and I played, good morning, look who's here, very nice. We say hello to Dr. Navid, but we say special to Jonathan. If I went ahead and I placed tzitzit in a garment, let's say in a garment that's not four corners, and then I went ahead and I make it into a four-cornered garment, but when I placed the tzitzit, it was not in a kosher fashion, right? So, well, let's say I placed the tzitzit. So there is a similar law. Good morning, Jaime.
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning, Mark.
Morning.
Morning. We're saying there's a similar law when it comes to tzitzit. There's a common denominator between tzitzit and schach. Both when you have to be made in a kosher fashion. You can't, if you make it in a not kosher fashion, and then subsequently something happened, let's say, for example, you went ahead and you had a haystack. You had a pile of hay. And let's say the hay is kosher for schach. Okay? Hay would be kosher for schach. And you went ahead and you cut inside this haystack, you went ahead and you cut out an area. You cut out a proper area where you have an area of a sukkah, and you have the walls of the haystack, let's say it's piled up very strong, and you have the walls, and now you have 7x7 on the inside. Let's say you like an igloo type of thing, and you went ahead and you cut away from the bottom of the haystack, and you made an area, open area. So now, are you going to tell me, is that a kosher sukkah? Good morning, Simon. That's not a kosher sukkah. Well, even though now, what do you mean, Rabbi? You have schach, there's a covering, you have walls, and you have the proper size. What's the problem? The answer is, when the cover was originally made, when I originally had a pile of haystack, that schach, that cover was not in a kosher fashion. It wasn't made. It was part of a pile of hay. That's not a kosher schach. That's not a kosher. That's not called a ceiling. But there was no hollow space. There was no empty space in the middle. So when the schach are made, when the roof is made, the roof has to be made. When you place the schach, it has to be done in a kosher fashion, in a way that it's kosher. And since you did not place the schach in a kosher fashion, the way the schach was made here, when you cut out in the haystack, you didn't do anything. You didn't touch the schach. You just worked around the schach, and now you have a schach. Now you have schach. So with the schach, the cover was not made in a kosher fashion. So that's not good. That will not be good by sukkah. Similarly, if let's say somehow you had tzitzit, you made tzitzit in a way that wasn't a kosher fashion, right? So it will not, the fact it's not, then later on something happened that now it's not kosher, unless you would have to do something to make it in a kosher fashion. Let's say I was suggesting an example. Let's say you place tzitzit in a garment that did not have four corners, and then so when you made the tzitzit, it wasn't kosher for tzitzit. There was no four corners, and then you went ahead and then you cut it to four corners. But when you made the tzitzit, it was not made in a kosher fashion because there was no four corners there. A case similar to that. So, let's say the garment was not the right size. You place the tzitzit on a garment that's not the right size, and later on you extended the garment. It's not. It wouldn't. Since when you place the tzitzit, it wasn't made in a kosher fashion because it wasn't the right size. So the fact that you extended the garment, but you didn't make the tzitzit in a kosher fashion. Is that clear? You have to, when you make the tzitzit, that needs to be that you have to make it in a kosher fashion. Just like you have to make the schach in a kosher fashion. And the Gemara said that the question of the Gemara is, if I made it in a not kosher fashion, and then subsequently I do something in the item itself. You see, the issue of the haystack, when I went ahead and I cut out inside of the haystack, and I made and there I was left with the covering. I did not make any move in the schach itself. I didn't touch the schach. I cut underneath. Is that clear? The story of the haystack. I did not do an action in the schach itself. The schach came out to be by itself without me doing anything. So that definitely will not be good. The question is, if I do something in the schach, let's say the Gemara gave the case, if I placed the vine on top of the sukkah while it was attached to the ground, and then subsequently, what did I do? I cut the vine. So the placement of the vine on top of the sukkah was done in a not kosher fashion, because you can't place schach that's attached to the ground on top of the sukkah. It has to be detached when you place it on the sukkah. But the fact that I now cut the vine, and the vine is the schach itself, the fact that I did that action, do we look at that action which happened in the schach itself as if we look at it as if I put the schach, as if I made the schach now? And it's as if I put the schach on the roof? Or we say, no, that's not called an action. That's not called you made it now. You just cut it. You just cut it. And therefore, you have to actually raise up every piece of the vine. You have to lift it up and put it back on. That is the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara brought two opinions, Rav and Shmuel. Rav was of the opinion, you know what? The fact that you just cut the vine is good enough. Even though you placed it on while it was attached to the ground, and that was not kosher, it's not kosher schach because it's attached to the ground. But once you cut the vine, we look at that cutting of the vine, since it's an act in the schach itself, as if you now made, we look at it as if you made it, and therefore it's kosher, as if you made this schach right now. Shmuel says no. Shmuel says that's not good enough. Okay, and that's the halacha. The halacha follows Shmuel, that you would have to move every piece of that schach, right, Simon? If you placed it on while it was attached to the ground, even though subsequently you made a snip and you cut it. Jonathan, clear? That is the case.
So
now,
if I move the hay, then I'm in the same place, right?
Exactly. If you move the hay, after you made the cut in the haystack, if you moved all the hay that's the schach, then it's like as if you placed it on. Moving it is as if you placed it. So now the Gemara is questioning this statement that we just said, that Shmuel is more strict. We recorded, we said that Shmuel is more strict, and Shmuel said it's not enough to just cut the vine. And also he would say by tzitzit, the Gemara says, if you place one tzitzit, one string, tzitzit is supposed to have 4 strings. You place 4 strings in, and then by placing 4 strings into the hole, then it folds. Now you have, and folds over. You have 8 strings, and then you're supposed to make the knots. We have 5 knots. We make 5 knots by the tzitzit, right? Tzitzit is 600. 8 strings, 5 knots is 613, right? So you see the tzitzit. What is tzitzit? The gematria of tzitzit. The numerical value of tzitzit is 600. Tzaddik is 90. Another tzaddik is 90, is 180. 2 yuds is a 10 and 10 is 200. And tough is 400. Tzitzit is 600. 8 strings, 5 knots, then it's 613. But if you made the knots in a way when it was not in a kosher fashion, you didn't have 4 strings. You started with 1 string, and you made from 1 string, you folded 1 string, and you made the 1 string into 4 strings. You folded it double, and then you had 4 strings, and you put those 4 strings through while it was only 1 string, meaning it's like 4. That's like if you look at the picture on 11A, 3 on the bottom, 11A3, 22 on the bottom. If you look at A is 1 string. You just push, you just doubled over the string, and you double it again, and you made it into 4. And then you went ahead, and afterwards you went ahead and then B, and then you went ahead, and eventually you want to cut the tips now to make it into 8 strings. Or eight, right, by cutting it. Now, is that kosher? But when I placed it in the garment, I placed it as 1 string. I didn't place it as 4 strings, then now I got 8 after I put it in. I placed it as 1 string, and I tied the knots, right, Yehuda? I tied it, I made it, I went around, I did the rings around, right? And then I tied it, and then I realized, oh wow, I made a mistake. I only have 1 string. It's all from 1 string. I have to have 4 strings. So what did the guy do? He snips the tips, and now I got 8 strings. Is that good enough? So the Gemara said that is the machloket between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says good enough. Just like by the Succah, you cut the vine, even though you placed it on while it was attached to the ground, you cut the vine, you're good. That action of cutting the vine is like you made it. And therefore, he says also, this opinion says, the fact that I did this act of cutting the string, that's good enough. Rav holds that's good enough, as if we look, it's as if I'm placing the string now. It's as if I'm like placing the string, and that's good enough. That is the opinion of Rav. And the Gemara says, Shmuel says that's not good enough. You have to untie the whole thing, and you have to remake the tzitzit. That is the. We're going to get that. That's what the Gemara is going to get to now. The Gemara so the Gemara is going to say the following. So the Gemara says, V'sama Shmuel, we're now on the page 11a3. V'sama Shmuel, the Shmuel hold, lo aminan psikatan ziyat asiyatan. We don't look at, if you're doing an act in the cutting of the tzitzit, as if you're now making the tzitzit. We don't look at it that way. V'hatani Shmuel mishum Rav Chia. Shmuel said in the name of Rav Chia, Hitil l'shnei kranot bevat achat. He went ahead and he placed the tzitzit into 2 corners at one time. He went ahead and he took 1 string and he placed it into 2 corners. That's the picture on number 24. You see the picture on 24 on the bottom, note 24. Jonathan, you got that note 24? You see that's the garment, Mr. Haber, you see it? And you see the 2 holes on the right and the left side, one mark, and he went ahead and he stuck the tzitzit in those 2 holes. It went through 1 hole, then he went into the other hole, and if you notice, you see that they were not 4 strings. They were just strings that were 1 string that was folded over, and multiple times, and that's why that's how he placed the tzitzit in that 1 string into the 2 corners of the tzitzit. Good morning, Mr. Silverman. So hit the l'shnei kornot on Yud Aleph 11a. Yud Aleph on Aleph. Hit the l'shnei kornot vasachas, and then the achakach posak rosh yechutim shelahem. After he did it in such a fashion, he went ahead and he snipped each top of each of those strings, because if you look at those strings, since it was only 1 string, so the other sides are all, he started with 1 string, and then he went ahead and then he cut in the center one, he cut straight down the middle, right? To make it that they'll get 4 strings on the top, and on the bottom, right? So therefore he'll have, on each side, he'll have 4 and 4 on the top, and then on the bottom ones, he'll also snip those tops to make it also 4. You got it? You see that? There's a loop, because he looped it because originally it was all 1 string. So now, once he snips everything, now he's going to have on each corner 8 strings, because he snipped it properly. So the Gemara is thinking, now what happened? He went ahead and first he put it to the 2 corners, and then he tied the knots. He tied the knot on the string, whichever one he made, he tied the 5 knots on each side, and then he goes ahead and subsequently he wants to go ahead and snip it. Yeah, so the question is, how would he tie that knot, right? So look what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, look, here's the Gemara's going to say, Mr. Batesh. Hit the l'shnei kronot bevat achat. He placed it that sits at 2 corners at one time. The achakach hosak, and the Gemara says, and then he went ahead and subsequently he cut the tips, called kosher. And the Gemara says, my lav shekosher ve'achakach posek. He tied it. He tied the strings, and then after he tied the strings, he went ahead and he cut the tips. Now look at the note on number 25 on the bottom. Although Shmuel does not state this clearly, the Gemara assumes that the knots were tied before the tips were snipped. Now, the question: how did they tie it? So, what did you say? Right. So, Mr. Batesh wants to know, how would you be able? We have any handy people over here who are familiar with making tzitzit? Maybe Yehuda will tell us. How would he have been able to tie if they didn't snip it beforehand? The Gemara is going to answer that he actually snipped it before he tied the knot. But the Gemara at this point, we have to be what? In picture 24 on the bottom, you see, but the problem is, because number 25 on the bottom, the 24 on the bottom, what are you going to be tying together, right? That's the question. No, so the Gemara is assuming that. The question is, how does the Gemara assume that? How would you be able to make that knot? Okay, so yeah. So what are you tying it with, right? Unless somehow the guy was able to fold it over. Maybe you fold it over. You take something and end. So maybe let's make believe. Yeah, make believe it's like a shoelace, right? Make believe like a shoelace. You go ahead and you take that loose end, Mr. Mark. You take that loose end, and then you pull it over, and then you pull it. You pull it over, and you pull it. Maybe that's how you did it. You see, you're working with a loose end. You have one loose end. So that loose end, you can wrap that loose end around and then pull it up. You're working with one string. So that's how the Gemara is thinking you did it. You took this one loose string and you went ahead and you wrapped it, pulled it, and you tied it. So now you created a knot. That's what the Gemara is thinking. So the Gemara says, so what do we see? We see, and Shmuel said, it's kosher. So we see Shmuel holds the fact that you snipped it at the end. We look at it, that's called, you made it. You did an action in the thing, and that's good enough. So the Gemara laughs, you tied it, and then you snipped it, and it's good. So you're telling me that Shmuel holds that it's no good, right? By the Sukkah, you told me it's not good enough to just cut the branch afterwards. You have to actually move everything. We see Shmuel says, Shmuel told the guy who made the tzitzit, but the Gemara understands, he placed it through the 2 holes and he tied it. And then only after he tied it, he snipped it. And Shmuel said it's good. So the Gemara says no. My life was low. The Gemara says that's not the case. Like Mr. Haber would say, it's all about the case, right? If there's a nuance in the case that can make the whole difference. Good morning, Kevin. After he went ahead and he placed it in the corners, like picture 20 and 24, then he cut it and then he tied it. That's the case. And that's the case why it's kosher. Shmuel says it's kosher. But if he would have went ahead and he would have made it, and then only after making it, he would snip it, he would say it's no good. So the Gemara asked the obvious question. If you went ahead and you snipped it before you tied it, so of course it's kosher. What do you need to tell me? What's the question? They came in front of Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel, this is what happened. They put it through the two holes, and then you went in and you cut it, and then after you cut it, you snipped it, then you tied it, tzitzit. Is it kosher? Well, of course it's kosher. You ready? It wasn't tzitzit yet. You made it in a proper fashion because you snipped it before you tied it. You have four strings. What's the issue? The Gemara answers, the issue is, but since when you placed it in the corner, it was not for tzitzit. You only snipped it after you placed it through the two corners. You would have thought the Torah says tzitzit hakanaf. Says you place let's not tzitz hakanaf on the corner, but if you place it into two corners, since you placed it into two corners at one time, you might think that that's invalidated. Because we're not al tzitzit hakanaf that the tzitzits that go on the corner. But since you place this tzitzit into two corners at the same time, you might think that would invalidate the making of the tzitzit. It's like you made it. That's called. You would have thought that part of the making of the tzitzit, good morning, is the way you place it into the. If you have to place it into one corner at a time. So therefore, that's the chidush. The chidush is that even though you place this string into two corners, and then only after you placed it into the two corners, you went in and then you snipped it, it's not going to, and you made it properly into separate tzitzit, it's not going to invalidate the making of the tzitzit. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Mahu detema, you might have thought, now we're turning the page. Mabruk, everybody. Mazel tov. Bi'inan knaf b'shas psil. You might think you need a knaf. Yehuda, if you want to get the Gemara, if I can matriach you, because I didn't take out, there's more Gemaras on the bottom there. Thank you very much. You might think he's like Yeshua ben Nun. Yeshua helped out in the tent, Me'inan Knaf b'shat b'sil. Everyone turning the page. You might think we are on 11b. Get out from the base on the top. You might think you need a knaf at the time of the placing in of the tzitzit. It should only be on one corner. And the kamash malan vileka. And here you place it at two corners. Kamash malan. You can. It's not a problem that you placed it into two corners simultaneously. That's what the Gemara says. Now, the Gemara now asks the following question. Meitivei. I have a question on Rav's opinion. Talon v'lo pasak rashi chuten shelahem. I went ahead and I took the tzitzit, one string, and I went ahead and I placed one string through the corner. I like the case we had originally, I folded it over, I folded the one string to make it, I folded that one string to make it two, and then into four. Then I placed it when it was full, when it was four. But it was one string. I placed it through the hole. Now I got 8. And then I tied it. I made the 5 knots. And then after I made the tzitz, I snipped it to make it into eight strings, right? Like picture that we had on the bottom, the first picture that we had on the bottom. So the Gemara understands, what do you say? Right, if I would have snipped it first and then tied it, no problem. But I didn't snip it. The Gemara's understanding, it says if I hung it and I did not, here it says, if I hung it and I did not snip it, it's psulin. It is, I placed the tzitzit in. Hung it means I placed it, I put the tzitzit, the one string through the hole, and I did not snip it, it is invalid. So the Gemara said, what are you saying? Oh, that's the question. My love, now for sure, if I snipped it right away, it's no problem. If I put it through and then snip it and then tie it, no problem. So what now? Here it says, if I put it through and I did not snip it, it says it's invalid. So now what does that mean? I did not snip it, it's invalid. Doesn't mean I did not slip it at the end, meaning I went ahead, I put it through, I put one string through, and then I tied it, and I never snipped it. And now you tell me it's invalid. Of course it's invalid if I never slipped it, because it's only one string. So what does it mean when it says if I put it in and I did not snip it, it's invalid? So the Gemara says most probably, what does it mean? If I put it in, I did not snip it initially, and then and I tied it, and then even if I snip it later on, since it wasn't snipped before I tied it, it's invalid. No. So meaning even if I snipped it later on, meaning what is the chidush of this break? I did not snip it in the beginning. I did not snip it. So now the question: what is the meaning of this breita? The breita says the following. The breita is presented the following way: I placed one string. Right. So the Gemara. Right. So what is exactly? So what is the breita talking about? So the Gemara is thinking, well, probably the breita is telling you the following: if you placed it and you didn't snip it in the beginning, even if you snipped it later after you tied it, but since you didn't snip it in the beginning and then you tied it, then it's still invalid. That's the chidush. No, there's a big chidush. That even if you snipped it at the end, meaning you snipped it after you tied it and then you snipped it. Right. And the Gemara wants to prove from here that Rav is wrong, because it says over here by saying it said if you did not that once you made it not in a not kosher fashion, snipping it is not enough unless you have to really untie it. Because by saying if you did not snip it, it's invalid. What are you teaching me? Of course, we didn't snip it, it's invalid. It means that the Gemara is thinking if you didn't snip it in the beginning, even if you snipped it at the end, it's still invalid. That's what the Gemara is. What? Right, and that. Right, that's a proof to Shmuel. That's what the Gemara is saying. My love, sulim lo'olam. Now, if you look at the Rashi, Mark, if you look at the Rashi, lo'olam, you have the second line from the top, the Rashi, lo'olam. Afilu mafashka l'shnayim. It's even if you cut it into two la'acha kishur, after you tied it, v'kasha l'Rav. And that's the question of Rav. Because Rav says, as long as you snipped it at the end, you're good. So the Gemara says, and when it says, v'tiyufta the Rav, and it would be a knockout. It would be a question of Rav's opinion. So Amar l'cha Rav. So Rav says, you know what the Braita means to say? When it says pasul, the Braita means to tell you the following: my psulim asher yifsaku. The Braita is telling you, read it this way: if you placed it in and you didn't snip it, it's invalid. But if you do snip it, it would be valid. If you placed it in and you made it and you tied it, Mark, that's how Rav would read it. Rav says, you know what the chiddush of the Braita is? The following: you placed one string in the hole and you tied it and you did not snip it. By telling me it's not kosher, what are you telling me? And you didn't snip it. But the inference is, but if you would snip it, now it would be kosher. That's how Rav is going to read. Good morning, Mr. Mitesh. That's how Rav is going to read it. Once it's unless you snip it, it's not kosher. But if you do snip it at any time, it would be kosher. So the Gemara says, Shmuel Amar. Shmuel says, Sulim La'olam. Shmuel says, if you place tzitzit in, you made one string, Mr. Mitesh. Instead of starting with 4 strings, we start with 4 and then we fold it over, then we put it in there, you have 8. If you place one string in and then you tied the strings when it was one string, and then you subsequently cut it to make it into a total of 8, it's no good, Shmuel says. V'chein Omar Levi. Shmuel's opinion is supported by Levi. Sulim la'olam. It is possible forever. V'chein Omar Rav Masna. Rav Masna Omar Shmuel Sulim la'olam. So we have a lot of rabbis that are supporting Shmuel's opinion, and that's going to be the law, especially when you have so many rabbis. So when you have many rabbis on one side and one rabbi on the other side, you don't have too many rabbis on this side. General consensus. Rav said if you made the tzitzit, you placed one tzitzit through the hole. Instead of placing 4 through the hole, you placed only 1. And you tied it. You tied the 5 knots, right? You did 7, 8, 11, 13. You know, you after each knot, you make 7, 7 rings around. Then you made 8 rings, and you made, right, 11, and you 13. You had 5 knots. And then after you made the 5 knots, you made the tzitzit. Then you finally, after you made it, now you snip the top to make it. Now you have 8 strings, because when you started with 1 string, you only had two loose strings. You only had 2 strings when you started once, because once 1 string folded over is 2. And now you have. So the vines, Rav says, if you snip the branch, once you snip it, even it's good. You don't have to move it at all. Rav said, Shmuel says, no. Shmuel said, you got him. If you place the vine on the sukkah when it was attached to the ground, it's not kosher schach if it's attached to the ground. Therefore, Shmuel says you got to go ahead and move every piece of that vine after you snip it. A do-over. It's a do-over. But we don't require you to actually have to pick up the whole thing and take the. But it sounds like if you move the whole thing, it's good enough. Just moving each and every branch would be good enough. So the Gemara says, Ika de Amri. Others say, Omar Rav Masna. Rav Masna said, Bididi havi uvda. I had such a story. There was a certain case that I myself hung one string through tzitzit. Instead of cutting it, making it into 4, having 4 strings, which is 8 to start with, I only put 1 string into the hole, and then afterwards I went ahead and I snipped it. I realized I made a mistake. I tied it not in the proper fashion. And I came in front of Shmuel. And what did he tell me? He says, you know what? It's invalid forever. If I place this 1 string into the hole, and then I tied it 5 with the 5 knots, I can't just snip it. I have to untie the whole thing, untie the tzitzit, and then remake it again. Technically, according to Al Gemara, you might not have to actually take it out of the thing, as long as the tying, when I start the tying, that might be sufficient. Maybe whether the halacha would say if to take it out or not, but from Al Gemara, it seems the main thing would be, because we had the Gemara before, that you place it as 1 string. Technically, that Shmuel sounds like he would be good as long as you tied it was already snipped when time you tied it. I want to thank everybody for coming. A beautiful crowd. What a crowd. And we welcome new members of the crowd, and welcome back to Kevin as well. And have a great day, everybody.
Rabbi,
yes.
I saw a young student of yours last night, Chai Katz.
Yes.
What a great kid.
He's an amazing guy. Yes. We could do a lot with him, Jaime.
I'm so impressed with him, Rabbi. Wow.
Yes. So but you know what? We got to take his kochot. And we gotta, that's the job that we have to do. Good morning, everybody. He's a very, cool with it. Great,
amazing. Yes. We got to invest in him. He's a star.
Right. That's what I mean to say to you, Jaime.
Absolutely.
And you know what? You agree with me, right? He's bringing me guys. He's bringing the boys to the yeshiva.
He's a star. Don't let go of him.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. He's everybody he's very popular, and he brings the boys with him. Yesterday, I had a couple of boys. Yep. One was a Ramaz boy. Have a great day. A Ramaz boy. He's growing. He's coming. But definitely. Jaime, I want you to keep connected with him. You know what I'm saying?
Rabbi, we're in the same business, me and you, so I get it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Thanks.
Great day, everybody. Jaime, I'll tell him what you said.